My name is Elena Rivera, and if there is one thing people often say about me, it is that I never give up. But I was not always this strong. In fact, there was a time in my life when I felt weak, afraid, and completely lost. The truth is, strength is not something you are born with. Sometimes life forces you to build it piece by piece, through pain, sacrifice, and love. I grew up in a small town where life moved slowly. Everyone knew each other, and most families lived simple lives. My parents worked very hard to support us. My father was a mechanic, and my mother sold homemade food at the local market. We were not rich, but we had enough. More importantly, we had love. My mother used to tell me something that I never forgot. She would say, "Elena, life will not always be kind to you, but as long as you keep moving forward, you will find a way." At that time, I did not understand how important those words would become. When I was young, I dreamed of becoming a teacher. I loved books and learning new things. I imagined myself standing in front of a classroom, helping children discover the world through knowledge. It was a beautiful dream, and for many years, I believed it would come true. But life does not always follow the path we imagine. When I was 21 years old, everything changed. I met a man named Victor. He was charming, confident, and full of big dreams. He talked about traveling, starting businesses, and building a better life. When he spoke, it felt like the future was full of possibilities. I fell in love quickly. Looking back now, I realize that love can sometimes make you blind. At that time, I saw only the good things. I ignored the small signs that something was not quite right. But when you are young and hopeful, you believe that love can solve everything. Victor and I married after 1 year of dating. It was a small wedding with only family and close friends. I remember standing there in my simple white dress, feeling both nervous and excited. I believed I was starting a wonderful new chapter of my life. For a while, everything felt perfect. We moved to a small apartment in the city. It was not very big, but it felt like our own little world. Victor worked at a construction company, and I found a job helping at a daycare center. I loved spending time with children. Their laughter made every day brighter. Then, 2 years later, something happened that changed my life forever. I became a mother. The day my son was born was the happiest day I had ever experienced. I still remember holding him in my arms for the first time. He was so small and fragile, with tiny fingers and soft breathing. In that moment, I felt something deeper than happiness. I felt responsibility. We named him Mateo. From the very beginning, Mateo became the center of my world. Every smile, every little movement, every small sound he made felt like a miracle. I promised myself that I would always protect him and give him the best life possible. But life was about to test that promise. When Mateo was only 3 years old, Victor began to change. At first, the changes were small. He came home later than usual. Sometimes he seemed distant, as if his mind was somewhere else. When I asked him what was wrong, he would simply say he was tired from work. I wanted to believe him, but deep inside, something did not feel right. Months passed, and the distance between us grew larger. The man who once spoke about dreams and the future now barely spoke at all. Sometimes he would sit silently at the dinner table, staring at his phone or the television. One evening, after Mateo had fallen asleep, I decided to ask him directly. "Victor," I said quietly, "is everything okay between us?" He looked at me for a moment, then sighed. "I don't think I'm happy anymore," he said. Those words felt like a sudden storm crashing into my life. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I feel trapped," he continued. "This life, this routine, it's not what I wanted." I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. "This is our family," I said softly. "Mateo needs us." He looked away. "I know," he replied, "but I need something different." That conversation was the beginning of the end. Over the next few weeks, our home became quiet and tense. We spoke less and less. Sometimes it felt like we were strangers living in the same apartment. Then one morning, everything finally broke. I woke up early, like I always did, to prepare breakfast for Mateo. But when I walked into the living room, I noticed something strange. Victor's suitcase was gone. At first, I thought he might have taken it for work. But when I checked the bedroom closet, I saw that many of his clothes were missing too. My heart began to race. I grabbed my phone and called him. He answered after a few seconds. "Victor, where are you?" I asked. There was a long silence. Then he said the words that changed everything. "I'm sorry, Elena. I can't do this anymore." My hands started shaking. "What about Mateo?" I asked, my voice almost breaking. "He'll be okay," Victor replied quietly. And then, he hung up. Just like that, the life I thought I had built disappeared in a single moment. I stood there in the middle of the living room, staring at the empty space where his suitcase used to be. For a long time, I could not move. My mind felt frozen. Then I heard small footsteps behind me. "Mom?" Mateo said sleepily. I quickly wiped the tears from my eyes and turned around. He stood there in his small pajamas, holding his favorite toy car. "Where's Dad?" he asked. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. How could I explain something so painful to a 3-year-old child? I knelt down and hugged him tightly. "Dad had to go away for a while," I whispered. Mateo didn't fully understand, but he nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. That morning, I made breakfast like nothing had happened. I smiled for Mateo, helped him get dressed, and took him to daycare before going to work. But inside, everything felt broken. I didn't know how I would pay the rent alone. I didn't know how I would raise Mateo by myself. And most of all, I didn't know if I was strong enough for what was coming. That night, after Mateo fell asleep, I sat quietly by the window, watching the city lights outside. My mother's words suddenly came back to my mind. Life will not always be kind to you, but as long as you keep moving forward, you will find a way. At that moment, I made a silent promise. No matter how difficult life became, no matter how tired or afraid I felt, I would never stop fighting for my son. Because from that day forward, I was no longer just Elena. I was a mother, and this was only the beginning of the story of the mother who never gave up. After Victor left, life changed faster than I was ready for. At first, I kept hoping he would come back. Every time my phone rang, a small part of me believed it might be him calling to say he had made a mistake. I imagined him standing at the door, apologizing and asking for another chance. But days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months. The phone never rang. Slowly, I had to accept a painful truth. Victor was not coming back. That realization felt like losing something all over again. Not just a husband, but the future I thought we would build together. The dreams we once shared had disappeared like smoke in the wind. But while my heart was hurting, life did not stop moving. Bills still needed to be paid. Rent still needed to be covered. Mateo still needed food, clothes, and love. And suddenly, everything depended on me. At first, I tried to keep my job at the daycare center while taking care of Mateo. Every morning, I woke up before sunrise. I prepared breakfast, packed his small bag, and walked him to the daycare where I worked. During the day, I took care of other people's children while worrying about my own future. I smiled, played games, and read stories to the kids. But deep inside, I was constantly calculating numbers in my mind. How much money do I have? Will it be enough this month? The truth was painful. It wasn't enough. The daycare paid very little, and raising a child alone in the city was expensive. Rent, food, electricity, and school supplies, every small expense felt heavier now that I carried it alone. Some nights, after Mateo fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, writing down every cost again and again, hoping the numbers would magically change. But they never did. I realized I needed to find another way, so I started looking for extra work. During the evenings, after finishing my shift at the daycare, I cleaned houses for people in the neighborhood. It was not easy work. My hands became rough, and my back often ached from bending and scrubbing floors. Sometimes I felt embarrassed, not because the work was dishonest, but because I had once dreamed of becoming a teacher. Instead, I was cleaning kitchens and bathrooms late at night just to survive. But every time those thoughts appeared, I looked at Matteo sleeping peacefully in his small bed, and suddenly, the embarrassment disappeared, because nothing mattered more than giving him a safe life. Matteo grew quickly. By the time he was 5 years old, he had already started asking questions about his father. "Mom," he asked one evening while drawing with his crayons, "why doesn't Dad live with us?" I felt my heart tighten. I had prepared for this moment many times in my mind, but when it finally came, the words still felt difficult. I sat beside him and gently brushed his hair. "Sometimes adults make mistakes," I said softly, "but that doesn't mean you did anything wrong." Matteo looked at me with his big, curious eyes. "Does Dad still love me?" he asked. That question broke my heart more than anything else. I held him close and said the only thing I was sure about. "I love you more than anything in this world." Matteo hugged me tightly, and in that moment, I realized something important. Even though our family was broken, love was still here. And that love would have to be enough. Years passed slowly, filled with hard work and small victories. Matteo started school, and he quickly became one of the best students in his class. His teachers often told me he was curious, kind, and hardworking. Every time I heard those words, I felt a deep sense of pride, but I also felt something else, pressure. I wanted to give him every opportunity possible. I wanted him to study, to grow, and to reach dreams that I had once lost. But money was always a problem. There were days when I skipped meals so Matteo could have better food. There were nights when I worked so late that my feet hurt too much to walk home. Still, I never complained, because every sacrifice had a purpose. One winter evening, something happened that I will never forget. I had just returned home from cleaning a small restaurant. My clothes smelled like soap and cooking oil, and my body felt exhausted. All I wanted was to sit down and rest. But when I opened the door, I saw Matteo sitting at the small table with his schoolbooks. He looked up and smiled. "Mom, I waited for you," he said. "Why aren't you asleep?" I asked, surprised. "I wanted to show you something." He handed me a piece of paper. It was a test from school. At the top of the page, written in red ink, was a big number. "I got the highest score in the class," Matteo said proudly. For a moment, I could not speak. All the tiredness, all the stress, all the worries of the past years suddenly felt lighter. I hugged him tightly. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered. Matteo looked at me seriously. "Mom," he said, "when I grow up, I'm going to work very hard so you don't have to be tired anymore." His words were simple, but they touched my heart deeply. I realized something in that moment. Children understand more than we think. They see our struggles. They feel our sacrifices. And sometimes those sacrifices become the greatest lessons we can give them. That night, after Matteo fell asleep, I sat quietly by the window again, just like I had done years earlier. But this time, something inside me felt different. I was still tired. I was still worried about money and the future. But I was no longer afraid, because every day, I saw proof that my efforts mattered. Matteo was growing into a strong, intelligent, and kind young boy, and that meant my fight was not useless. Still, life had one more challenge waiting for us, one that would test my strength more than anything before. At that time, I did not know it yet, but the hardest moment of my life was still coming. Life has a strange way of testing people when they are already tired. For many years, I worked without stopping. I cleaned houses, helped at the daycare center, and sometimes took extra shifts at a small restaurant nearby. My days began before the sun rose, and often ended long after Matteo had fallen asleep. Some people asked me how I could keep going like that. The truth is simple. When you are a mother, giving up is not an option. Matteo was growing into a bright and kind young boy. His teachers often told me how hardworking he was, how he always helped other students, and how he loved learning new things. Hearing those words always filled me with pride, but it also reminded me how important it was to keep supporting him. By the time Matteo turned 15, he had a clear dream. He wanted to become a doctor. The first time he told me, I smiled, but inside, I felt a wave of fear. Becoming a doctor required many years of study and, most importantly, more money than I had ever seen in my life. Still, I did not show my fear. Instead, I looked at him and said the same words my mother once told me: if you keep moving forward, you will find a way. Mateo studied harder than anyone I had ever seen. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I often saw the light from his room still shining. While other teenagers were playing games or watching television, he was reading books and solving difficult problems. Sometimes I worried he was pushing himself too hard, but every time I asked him to rest, he simply smiled and said, "I'm okay, Mom. This is my dream." Years passed quickly, and before I knew it, Mateo was finishing high school. One afternoon, he came home with an envelope in his hand. His face looked serious, but there was a small spark in his eyes. "Mom," he said quietly, "the university sent their decision." My heart began beating faster. We sat together at the small kitchen table. My hands felt cold as Mateo slowly opened the envelope. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Mateo read the letter. He stopped halfway through and looked at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What does it say?" I asked nervously. Mateo took a deep breath. "I got accepted," he said softly. For a second, I couldn't move. The words felt unreal, like something from a dream. "You mean medical school?" I asked. Mateo nodded. "Yes, Mom, they accepted me." Tears filled my eyes immediately. I hugged him tightly, feeling the years of struggle and sacrifice rushing through my heart all at once. But then Mateo added something else. They also gave me a scholarship. I pulled back and looked at him, confused. "A scholarship?" "Yes," Mateo continued. "They said my grades were one of the highest they have ever seen. They will pay for most of my education." At that moment, I finally cried. Not quiet tears, but deep emotional tears that came from years of worry, exhaustion, and hope. All those long nights, all those difficult days, all those sacrifices, they had not been wasted. Mateo placed his hand gently on my shoulder. "Mom," he said, his voice full of emotion, "I couldn't have done this without you." I shook my head. "No," I replied softly. "You did this with your hard work." But Mateo smiled. "You never gave up on me," he said, "even when things were difficult." His words stayed with me for a long time, because that was the truth. Life was not easy. There were many moments when I felt tired, afraid, or uncertain about the future. There were nights when I wondered if I was strong enough to keep going. But every time those doubts appeared, I remembered the promise I made when Mateo was just a little boy. I promised I would never stop fighting for him. And somehow, that promise gave me strength. Years later, Mateo finally graduated from medical school. The day of his graduation ceremony was one of the proudest days of my life. The large hall was filled with students wearing black gowns and caps. Families sat in rows, clapping and cheering as each graduate walked across the stage. When they called Mateo's name, my heart felt like it might burst with pride. I stood up and applauded louder than anyone. As he walked across the stage to receive his diploma, I saw the confident young man he had become. No longer the small boy with the toy car in his hands, but someone strong, intelligent, and compassionate. After the ceremony, Mateo walked toward me through the crowd. He was smiling, but his eyes were full of emotion. "Mom," he said, hugging me tightly, "we did it. We did it. Not just him, not just me, but both of us together." At that moment, I finally understood something important. Success is not always about money, fame, or recognition. Sometimes success is simply seeing the person you love become the best version of themselves and knowing that you helped them reach that place. Today, when people ask me how I managed to raise a son alone and never give up, I always tell them the same thing. Love gives you strength you never knew you had. Because when you truly love someone, quitting is never an option. That is the story of my life. The story of a mother who faced fear, hardship, and uncertainty, but kept moving forward, not because I was always strong, but because my love for my son was stronger than any obstacle. And that is why people now call me the mother who never gave up. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed this emotional story and want to improve your English through powerful storytelling, don't forget to support my channel. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, English Shadowing Stories. On English Shadowing Stories, you can enjoy emotional English stories, listening practice for English learners, real-life lessons, and inspirational stories. Simple English to improve your vocabulary and fluency. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with your friends, and leave a comment telling me, what would you have done if you were in Elena's situation? Your support helps this channel grow and helps more people learn English through meaningful stories. See you in the next story on English Shadowing Stories.